Alright, so we are on to our final bit of the game, or at least our final Colossus. We're going to have another section where we do the ending entirely by itself, and so this will be the last creature that we encounter, and I don't want to sit back and talk about it too much in terms of gameplay, even though we'll talk about a little bit what it's doing. I want to talk in terms of the summation of everything that's happening, some of the story beats we're hitting, and a lot of other things that are happening. So as we approach this sealed off gate, which I've opened earlier, to get to the last Colossus, we actually see a hawk, which is a nice little omen that ties into our notion of the soul again. So it's a rather fortuitous thing that that hawk showed up as we approach our last Colossus. I don't know if that always happens. So that's a nice little bit of the game sort of meshing with us and sort of playing with symbols that we've imbued with meaning, the hawk being an image of the soul. And here we have one of the few real story elements in the latter half of the game, and it happens right at the very, very end of things. We have this moment here, which is actually going to be visually mirrored later on in the ending of the bridge collapsing, but we have Agro throw Wander off the horse, off of her, rather, and sort of fall, and she sort of gives her life to ensure that Wander can move forward on his quest. And the really cynical way to look at this, the really boring way to look at this would be to say, like, now the player has been robbed of a tool, and they sort of lament the loss of this tool. They lament the loss of this sort of ludic option that they had for expression, because during the second half of the game, we spent a lot of time with Agro and sort of bonding with her and using her in fights because we needed to use her in fights. But the second half of the game is setting up this relationship almost explicitly for this moment, because Agro has been our only friend, our only companion, the only thing close to a kind force inside of this space, and now all of a sudden we've lost her and we truly are alone. I'm trying to get a good camera angle here so I can show off Wander's face. By now, Wander has endured a lot of corruption, and so Wander's face reflects that entirely. It's sort of gross and scarred, and his skin is very, very pale. And I wasn't concerned with showing this off earlier during the game, because even though it shows up from point to point, there's about like 3 or 4 stages of corruption. It didn't really matter to me too much, because it's far more effective, I think, when you look at it at the end, right? So maybe it's this thing, it's a very subtle thing as it progresses. It's something that the player might not even notice until they actually reach this point, when they reach near the end and they've killed so many colossi, that it really impresses upon the player this notion that not only is Wander holding all these bits of dormant soul, but Wander, in his quest, has done something so alienating when it comes to, like, the human condition, almost, this notion of killing and killing and killing again, that it has physically scarred him. So it's not even a matter of just, like, the narrative conceit of, okay, well, Wander now has bits of dormant soul in him. It's more like his soul, his physical experience, expression is fundamentally tainted by the behavior that he has taken part in, which is largely a desecration of nature, a form of religious sort of sacrilege or blasphemy, and then just sort of this single-minded pursuit that leads him down a very violent course of action. All of those things build up to alienate him from humanity and the human condition in general. And it's a very simple thing for the game to do, but it's a very effective thing to do, and I wanted to wait until we got to this point of our journey, as we sort of head into this last stretch in this dark lair, to show that the darkness of the environment and the massive darkness associated with this Colossus is partially mirrored in Wander himself. This is Malus. Malus is the masculine in Latin. It just means bad or evil, which, given the imagery here of the clawed hands and sort of the more demonic qualities, makes sense. We're having light and dark used in a very interesting way. We have what is possibly the darkest colored Colossus, like, not just because of the terrain, but I mean, like, just physically, like, it is a dark colored beast, and then it has these sort of magical bindings on its wrist, almost like shackles. And one thing that we need to note about Malice is that Malice cannot move. Malice is stationary, like some sort of large tower. And whether that's because it has been sealed that way on purpose or anything is sort of left for the player to intuit, but it is by far the largest Colossus. And when we have to deal with it, we're sort of navigating towards it. We don't have to worry about it like stepping on us or anything, but we really get a chance to look at it. Just the scale of it all, the fact that it commands all of this magical power, the fact that it has been apparently sealed away in such an effective manner. It's behind a sealed door that requires you to kill all of the other Colossi to reach. It is very powerful, as you just saw. It was able to knock me down into this trench. Malice is, when we look at any of the Colossi in the game, and sure, we've had things like Gaius that were very militarized, or, you know, other creatures like Dirge that were sort of very magical and imposing. This one takes all of those animal qualities and all of those human qualities and those magical qualities, and it puts them all into one giant, like, sort of summation, right? If all those things were miniature parts that made up a whole, Malice contains every parts of those. It is animal, it is man, it is magic, all converging into one point, which makes sense because supplementary material calls Malice the sorcerer. And if we want to, we can consider the scale of Malice as a creature, the power that it seems to hold, and we can sort of try and sit back and ask ourselves, why is this the last Colossus? Why is this design the last one we encounter? And part of that is, I would suggest, because it potentially contains the largest bit of dormant soul. It is clearly a Colossus that has such raw, magical, and destructive power that it's very fitting that it is the last Colossus that we have to defeat, because if we picture all of the bits of dormant that we've sort of collected as this puzzle, there's going to be like some big gaping part, right, where, like, let's say we're putting together some sort of Frankenstein's monster out of all these cobbled parts, but those cobbled parts are like dormant soul bits. The one thing that's lacking, right, to complete the whole thing is like a heart. And if we want to look at Malice as sort of this heart of evil, this heart of darkness, if I want to steal a phrase from Conrad, it's absolutely fitting that this is the last creature that we encounter, and that it is massive. It has incredibly raw destructive potential, and it is outright viciously hostile to Wander. I want to note that I do think that there is an interesting contrast that occurs between having Wander now be this sort of small vessel of evil himself, while we're facing Malice, who is the largest vessel of evil. Malice contains what is obviously a large, powerful sort of soul force, and Wander has, by now, 15 sort of bits of dormant within him, and so I think the juxtaposition between the large creature and Wander, in this case, is doing something a lot more than just showing off how small Wander is physically, or, you know, how small humans are compared to Colossi. It's showing that the scope of evil, or like the breadth of evil, it's not limited to physical bounds, right? So when I sit here and I look at this sequence, I ask myself, okay, which one of these two individuals is more evil? Malice, whose name literally means evil, or Wander, who has gone on this quest and ultimately forsaken the traditions of his people, gone about and destroyed sort of natural things that have their own sort of spectacular beauty to them, and who is possibly endangering everyone for the sake of just his single-minded purpose of reviving Mono. And so I look at these two, you know, if I look at them as actors, or rather as characters in the space, because Wander is only the real actor in the space, I have to sit back and say, like, what is the juxtaposition that's occurring here? And it's not just scale. It's that both of these individuals are beasts at this point. Regardless of what the motive is, Malice doesn't have a motive. Malice is basically a mindless creature, regardless of how much power it contains. Wander, by now, contains all sorts of power. Also, because the player has so much more competency. But Wander's going on this journey, and it's a motive that we understand where it's, how far would you go for someone that you love? But the question isn't how far you would go necessarily. I mean, that's the rhetorical question, that the game might be asking. But the statement it's actually making is, how much damage will you cause to yourself, to others, to the world around you in order to save someone you love, right? So when it's saying how far will you go, it's not like, oh, what sort of things will you do to yourself? Although undoubtedly Wander sort of sacrifices, and I don't even mean sort of, fundamentally sacrifices his own humanity on this journey. He upsets so much, so many other things than just himself. And although the motive is pure, the damage is absolutely real and observable and powerful. I don't know if you can hear the track because of how I'm recording right now, but the track in the background is very somber. It is called Demise of the Ritual, and the ritual that's ending here is not, the ritual slaughter of these creatures, but it's Wander destroying the ritual that bound them and Dorman in place. And the music is very sad. Destroying this ritual, destroying this magic that was protecting everybody, is not a good thing. And by now, if the player doesn't understand that, they will surely understand that when we go through the ending. But for now, we've just slayed our last creature, and all that's left is a large towering corpse that will stay there and exist for who knows how long until people forget. But we'll talk about more of this as we move on to the ending.